Hello, David Hopewell from Gwynedd Archaeological Trust here again. This is the third of our lectures looking at the Romans in North West Wales and the work of the Trust in this subject. This follows on from the previous lecture where we were looking at the geophysical survey we've been doing, looking at the Roman Forts Environs Project. There's one site that came out as being of particular importance and particular interest, which we're looking at in this lecture as a separate subject. This is the fort at Llanfor, which is near Bala. If you've been to the National Eisteddfod there, you will have been walking around above the Roman landscape. And this is the reason why we've done so much work there. The Eisteddfod does actually produce some disturbance to the site, so we've been looking at using geophysical survey in particular over many years to try and identify the archaeology to make sure that it doesn't get disturbed. I did the first survey here a long time ago. There's more done by Ian Brooks and for the National Park, and then we resurveyed it all when the next Eisteddfod came along. As I noted before, it was discovered as these very intriguing aerial photograph by St Joseph, and we carried over the years we've carried out a huge amount of geophysical survey looking at it's almost a kilometre across here, and we still haven't really got to the end of it either, of the archaeology at Llanfor. On here you can just about see the main features, but I'm going to go through them a bit at a time because it's a bit of a small slide here. This is interesting in that our technology moved along as we were doing the survey. So the first survey we did was at a sort of standard resolution, which produced these fantastic results. But as our equipment got better and meant that we could do faster and more accurate surveys, it meant that we could actually go up another notch in resolution of our surveys, and this seemed to be the ideal place to try it out. So it went from something looking like this to something looking like this, which is even clearer. So this is the interior of the fort, and we can see every room and just about every post hole within the fort. Quite remarkable. Don't know why it came out so well. We're on river gravels in the Dee Valley, but one thing, just while we're on this, it looks like we're looking at a wooden fort. So we're not looking at a stone fort here. Looking at a wooden fort. It doesn't look like there's been much in the way of rebuilding, so it looks like it was a very short-lived fort. Right, let's have a quick look at the whole landscape here. It's worth looking at this first because it allows to get a bit of an idea of what we're looking at overall. So as I said, we've got the fort and the stores compound. These big marching camps are not so easy to see on the geophysics, but they are quite substantial structures. We think these were probably to do with earlier campaigning. So we're on the Dee Valley here, so it's a way up from the fort at the legionary fort at Chester. So this may be where the first incursions came in from Chester. Difficult to know, not sure for certain. And we're not even sure which campaign they come from necessarily. We're presuming it's the Flavian campaign in the AD 70s, but it could be earlier. Not sure. Other things that came up on the geophys are some earlier features. We can see two circular features, which are Bronze Age barrows. There's a pit alignment, which is just about in the centre of the slide. We've got ridge and furrow ploughing. There's a farm in a rectangular enclosure on the east, and we've got a Vicus settlement showing up quite nicely. So let's have a quick look at some of these features. This is the polygonal stores compound, quite an unusual feature. The double ditch defences along with 3 gates on the eastern side, which you can see and if you look very carefully on the inside of the gates, you can see 4 little anomalies, which are presumably guard towers. We've got a quite a complicated little bit, unfortunately cut through by the current field boundary, but we've got the Bronze Age barrow, and then beside that we have the line of the ditch of the large temporary or marching camp, which sort of skirts around the barrow quite nicely, and you can see the other Bronze Age barrow at the northeast up there as well. So yeah, we think it's been interpreted as a stores compound, somewhere to safely store materials during a campaign. Without excavating it, we couldn't be entirely sure. So heading up to the north of the survey, this shows us the ditches of the camps. Not quite so easy to see, but if you look for the curving corners of the camps, you can see these. At the south of here, you can see lots of nice ridge and furrow from medieval period. This is just to the north of the fort, and we have Vica's settlement. So this is nice. This is as we've seen in the previous lectures, this is a sort of civilian settlement. I think this one's particularly interesting because we're looking at a wooden fort here. It looks as though it was very short-lived, but even though it was short-lived, we already have a Vica settlement appearing apparently very quickly. So it tends to make me think that the people who were living in Vicus initially were people who were actually coming along with the Roman army. So it could be all kinds of things, from tradesmen to unofficial wives. But interesting. This is our farm out on the east side. You can see a little post-built rectangular building in the corner and an entrance to the north. And then the fort itself. This is a 200-metre square fort, absolutely crammed to the gills with buildings. Quite an unusual layout. Pardon me. Probably looked something like this. There goes a jet. Although this one isn't quite as crammed full of buildings, but this kind of thing. As I was saying, 3 defensive ditches. We did actually manage to get a section through the ditches. The innermost ditch was quite a substantial and deeply cut ditch through these, as you can see, this sort of stony subsoil. There we go. Sections through them show the different depths. So the inner ditch was quite deep, with like an ankle breaker at the bottom. It looks like the rampart has been ploughed pretty much flat, and then we've got 2 smaller ditches to the outside. Looking at the interior of the fort, we can see all kinds of features on the geophysical survey. It's very detailed. This is on one side where you can see the 3 ditches, and on the inside of the ditches you can see these multiple anomalies I think they're in 6s. So this is a gatehouse. You can see the gates here at Lunt, which gives us a sort of an idea of what the kind of thing we're looking at. So we're looking at a wooden fort, as we were saying. When you get to the centre of the survey, we can see things in sort of great detail. This is the as I'm sure you'll be able to recognise from our previous discussions in earlier lectures, this is the headquarters building, and we can see this in remarkable detail down to sort of post holes. So we have on the eastern side we have a sort of portico. So we've got a row of supports around the edge, and then there's a cross corridor to the west, and then a series of administrative rooms with a larger one in the middle, which is probably the sort of shrine room. This shows this up particularly clearly. A very nice example. To the side of this, to the south of this, we have the commander's building. It's quite an interesting one. We again got this open sort of courtyard in the centre, so bringing Mediterranean buildings to North Wales, and a great range of rooms around it. Some of them which are showing up very strong these black blobs, which are to do with heating, so thermo-remnant anomalies. So we might be looking here at some kind of like small bath suite or something within the commander's house. If we move to the other side, I'm not quite so sure what this building is. It's quite complicated. Could be a workshop, could be a hospital, something along those lines. It's an unusual one. I think I know what it is, but it seems a strange thing to find within the fort. But if we're looking at a campaign fort where security is going to be very strong, it might explain it. I think this is a bathhouse. It has three very strong anomalies in it that look like the kind of thing you would find in a bathhouse. But normally bathhouses are outside of a Roman fort. And I think some of this might well be to do with the fire risk. So having a bathhouse in the interior of a wooden fort, either they were desperate or I'm interpreting it incorrectly. One of the most obvious features within the fort is this line, these multiple lines across a building. Now this is a very typical granary. So the lines are actually small ditches that would have had posts in them, which would have lifted the granary up off the ground to help protect the grain from vermin and also to keep it dry. The very strong anomalies along the southern side of it, I think, mean that at some point it had a bit of an accident and caught on fire, because it looks like strong thermo-remnant anomalies along the southern side there. Here's my interpretation of it. You can see it a bit more clearly. We've got all kinds of things around it. We've got these little these open-fronted buildings on either side of it, which are quite typical sort of legionary fortress features. It can be little workshops, or I'm not entirely sure in this case. This is to give you an idea of what the granary would have looked like. This is the reconstructed granary from Lunt, and you can see the posts holding the granary up off the ground. So this is the kind of thing that we would have been looking at. So one feature about this fort that is most obvious is there are lots and lots of barracks in it. So here we have in the northern side a row of 6 barracks. They're infantry barracks with not particularly easy to see, but it looks like that each barrack consists of a long row of 11, we call them contubernia, which are like paired rooms which held usually 8 soldiers. And then on the eastern side we've got some bigger rooms, which is where is the officers' quarters. So there we go. That's the first. And if you look carefully, you can see, particularly on the northern one, you can see along the edge of it a series of post holes, which means that there was actually a veranda along the front of the barracks, looking something like this. I think this is in the Saalburg in Germany. So this is the kind of thing we'd be looking at there. Here's a reconstruction drawing of the interior of a barrack room. I think this is from Anne Johnson's Roman Forts book. So you can see this. You'd have usually find a hearth, and you'd have a bunch of men living in quite close quarters there. And these individual contubernia were usually divided into two, one of which would be like the living quarters, the other side would be more of a storeroom, I think. So this is the overall interpretation, my overall interpretation of the fort, and the one bit I had a great deal of difficulty with when trying to draw it up, which was in the on the western side here, and you could see I was having great difficulty working out where the walls were within these barrack blocks. So you've got lots more barrack blocks here, but the walls didn't seem to line up properly, and I couldn't work out what was going on initially until I spoke or got in touch with and saw some of the discoveries that up on the line of Hadrian's Wall. And then I realised that we're actually looking at paired rooms, but one side of the pairs had individual anomalies in them. So this is how it should actually be interpreted. So these, as far as we know, are cavalry barracks. So it's very different to the infantry barracks in that they had horses in one side of them. This is a fairly recently recognised style of barracks, and not something I'd seen before. The anomalies in the rooms are actually pits, so they're pits to soak away the horse's urine. Charming. I imagine these might have been slightly smelly barracks. These have been the thing that alerted me to them were examples in Wallsend, South Shields, but once you start looking for them, these things start turning up. There's recently a stunningly well-preserved example at Vindelander, an early phase of Vindelander, and it looks like we've also got them at Carlisle as well. So this is the Wallsend example. They're not quite as long, but you can see in the southern part of the fort there exactly the same arrangement, though with slightly less than the 12 contubernia that we have in Llanfor. So this is roughly the kind of thing we'd be looking at. So this is from Nick Hodgson, and Paul Bidwell wrote a paper about these in Britannia, which is worth looking at. So, having got all this information, we needed to get this published, so I worked with Nick Hodgson from South Shields, and he wrote part of the paper with me. Having looked at the geophysics, we can come up with quite a few ideas about what was going on here. It looks like the garrison was something along the lines of 500 auxiliary cavalry and 480 legionary infantry, a cohort. That seems to fit what we've got. Those small open-fronted buildings, tabernae, and the large numbers of rooms in the headquarters building also look as if we've got a legionary influence here. It's an unusual fort, but Nick Hodgson and Jeff Davis note that large forts tended to form part of the campaigning phase of Roman incursions in the early years, at least. So we've got parallels. There are some parallels, though this is the first one we've actually seen exactly what was going on and seen it in where you can actually see the layout of the fort. So there are parallels in Carlisle and Rottweil 3 in Germany. Llanfor, I think we have to be looking at this as being a place of great strategic importance. We're on the Dee Valley from the legionary fort at Chester. So it looks as though this was, the temporary camps were probably earlier campaigns, but this looks like the springboard for the main invasion of northwest Wales. We presume this is from Agricola's time, so in the, or thereabouts in the AD 70s, but even though we've done some excavation there, we haven't actually got any good datable finds, and none have come up from the site at all. So a very interesting fort there. I think that's all I've got to say for this short lecture on Llanfor. Our next one will be looking at Roman roads.